This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I won't be on the show today. Ed Morrissey is guest hosting for me today. I'm winging my way from the Beltway to Studio West, from 0 degrees to 70 degrees. Although I hear it's raining, but I don't want to, taunt you too much. Ed Morrissey coming right up. Stay tuned. A great Hugh Hewitt show ahead.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel. Portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm not there. I'm in the air. Actually, I'm flying from the Beltway back to California for a couple of months. I'm going to be doing some teaching, going to be doing some anything but freezing because the Beltway is that. Luckily, Edward Morrissey the First, Ed the Great, is here to bring you into the new year with a little Texas talk. Thank you, Ed, for sitting in today, and take it away.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com coming to you live from the ReallyFactor.com studios here deep in the heart of Texas. Actually, I'm Edward Morrissey II. My dad's Edward Morrissey the First, and Mr. Morrissey to all of you, but I'm Ed, so you can just call me Ed. And great to be back with you. Some breaking news this morning, just as I was getting up. Apparently, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI has become very ill enough to where Pope Francis has announced it at his weekly audience. His weekly audience takes place on Wednesdays, generally around 11 a.m. in St. Peter's Square, and he asked the faithful gathered there to pray for Benedict and to ask the Lord to comfort and support him until the end, which does not sound as though this is going to be a happy outcome. But certainly, for the faithful, it's a happy outcome. You're with the Lord. But for the rest of us here, it sounds as though that Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI is very ill and progressing towards the end of his life. That's the way it certainly was made to sound. The Vatican's since come out and clarified this a little bit, saying, well, he's doing worse than before, but it's still under control. So we'll keep an eye on that. If anything else transpires, and it probably won't during the course of the show, we'll certainly shift over and talk a little bit more about that. But it's been almost 10 years since Benedict XVI stunned the world with his retirement, and Pope Francis shortly thereafter was elected Pope at the conclave in March of 2013. So I'm not sure that anybody really expected that this was going to be a 10-year-long era in the Catholic Church, and it has been really It has been a very interesting era to view. Pope Benedict XVI has pretty much stuck with his promise to have a contemplative, prayerful life and to stay out of the public view. With a couple of exceptions, he's published a couple of books in the meantime, but pretty much he has stayed out of his successor's way and let Pope Francis be Pope. And so it's been a remarkable 10 years in this emeritus pontificate. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll pray that we have good outcomes here. But it's something certainly to keep an eye on. Other things to keep an eye on. Let's turn then back to domestic politics to keep an eye on. One of the things that we're going to be keeping a very close eye on is the arc of Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, reelected in a landslide last month, and a lot of people are wondering, is he peaking too soon, right? I mean, at one point they were saying, well, Ron DeSantis, he barely won his election. He's not that strong. He doesn't have that kind of strength. And now all of a sudden, after his 19-point blowout of Charlie Crist last month, people are saying, well, maybe he's peaking. And our VIP columnist, Tom Jackson, over at Hot Air, sort of poked fun at that yesterday because Ron DeSantis just keeps finding a way to find new peaks. And that brings us to Chaya Raichik, who is also known as Libs of TikTok. And her revelation yesterday, she talked about this on Fox News with Tucker Carlson. So let's go to cut number 8 and hear Chaya Raichik talk about this.
Is there anyone who reached out to you, who supported you, who took your side?
Yes. First of all, you.
Please.
I really appreciate it, Tucker.
That's an easy one.
I will say this. When I was doxxed, someone from Ron DeSantis' team called me.
Really?
Yes. And she said, the governor wanted me to give you a message. He said, if you don't feel safe, or you or your family, if you need a place to go, to hide, to stay, you can come to the governor's mansion.
What?
He said, we have a guest house for you, and you can come and stay as long as you need.
The governor of Florida did.
Yes. I can't even, I was almost in tears. Like, the governor of Florida. Like, he has nothing but, like,
And you're living in
bigger to
California.
deal with. I'm living in California. And he took time out of his, I'm assuming, extremely busy schedule.
You'd think. Yeah.
I mean, he's the governor of Florida. And to send someone to call me to make sure I'm safe.
That's crazy.
Unreal.
And invite you to stay at his house?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad I asked that question.
Yeah. It was incredible. I don't even have the words for it. Like, so grateful.
You know, Dwayne, you're in California, right? You live in California where Charitable lives, right?
Yes.
So where was your governor on this? I mean, this is one of his constituents. Where is Gavin Newsom? I imagine Gavin Newsom not only picked up a phone because it's his own constituent, it's a Californian who was at risk, but he actually probably sent, a team of security experts down there to help Chea Raychik, libs of TikTok, survive this doxing
Gavin
by Taylor Lawrence.
Newsom would have been among the many on the left who was actually okay with and encouraged Twitter censoring people like this.
Well, the reason why I bring up Gavin Newsom is not just to pick on you for being a Californian. It's not just...
Hey, that's easy enough to do these days.
Well, and Gavin Newsom is a large part of the reason why it's easy enough to do it these days. But it's because Gavin Newsom is making it clear that he's got presidential aspirations, right? I mean, he's running campaign ads in Florida at the time that Ron DeSantis has somebody pick up a phone and offer her to stay at the guest house at the governor's mansion, right? He's running these ads about, California is more free than Florida. You should come to California, which nobody did. Well, how many people left California? The net population loss last year was, 300,000?
Right, something like that, yeah. I mean, California lost a congressional seat for the first time in decades, right?
Right.
Maybe ever. I don't know if California's ever actually lost a congressional seat because of a 10-year census, but they actually lost a seat this time because people moved out. But the thing here is Ron DeSantis is essentially making the state of Florida a sanctuary state for California refugees, especially ones persecuted by social media giants.
I'm as stunned by this as Tucker Carlson was when he asked the question, who reached out to you. I had just kind of assumed
politically, tactically.
He's brilliant.
If you're toying with the idea of running for president and wanting to appeal to a conservative audience, boy, that's got to score some points, isn't it?
Well, not just a conservative audience. This is a national. It's a national audience as well. I mean,
sure.
This isn't. I mean, it's easy enough, or it should be easy enough, for a governor of a state to step into a situation involving somebody who's living in his own state to say, look, this isn't the right thing to do. We need to make sure that this person is safe in her house. We're going to work, even though I disagree with her on these topics. This is part of my role as governor is to step in and do this. Gavin Newsom didn't bother to do any of that. Instead, Ron DeSantis is basically being a shadow president here by saying, "Look, I'm here in Florida, and I'm seeing this injustice all the way across on the other coast of this country, 3,000 miles away from anything that I have responsibility for, and I still think that this is something I need to take care of."
Right.
That's presidential, baby.
Well, yeah, the gubernatorial proxy war between California and Florida continues, yes.
Well, I mean, it's not much of a war.
Well,
it's not much of a war, right? At this point in time.
Gamesmanship, yes.
Gamesmanship, yes. War. If it's a war, then Gavin Newsom is leading Pickett's charge up against Ron DeSantis's cannon fire in Gettysburg. That's the only analogy I could come up with in terms of war. But to get back to Ron DeSantis and his presidential aspirations, Dwayne. I mean, this is. I'm sure he wanted to do this more because he felt that there was a safety issue for her, and he is on her side clearly in this fight. But you can't deny the fact that this looks awfully good if you're going to be president. And as Tom wrote yesterday, it just shows that there's all sorts of different ways that Ron DeSantis can still make his president felt in this.
I mean, here's the one that's got to be looking at themselves. Greg Abbott is thinking to himself, Now, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I have a staffer to think that for me? Chris Sununu's going, I could have made some hay out of that too. I mean, there's
Well, I'm gonna give you the background on this.
live free or die state, right?
I'm gonna give you the background. No, that's New Hampshire. But I'm
That's
gonna
what I'm
give you
saying.
the
Chris
background on this.
Sununu could have done it.
Oh, Chris Sununu, yeah, but Greg Abbott looked around, realized he was in Austin, and figured that wouldn't work.
Right.
All right. There's Texas and there's Austin. On that note, I'm Ed Morrissey filling in for Hugh Hewitt. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Welcome back. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today. He's on a travel day today. And Merry Christmas, a belated Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year coming up. There's only 3 days left in 2022. A lot of people are looking for year-end tax deductions. And if you act today, I can help secure one for you. Just go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Prison Fellowship banner. Many of you donated to Hugh's Prison Fellowship Angel Tree campaign, but the great work of Prison Fellowship continues throughout the year, offering thousands of incarcerated men and women the opportunity to participate in Prison Fellowship Academy, which literally changes lives and prepares them to transition back to their home communities when their sentences are completed, and impacting over 300,000 children of prisoners through the Angel Tree summer camps and other youth-oriented activities like this Angel Tree Sports Camp in Atlanta.
First up, let's go.
Over 120 kids participating in Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree program in Atlanta. A day of football and fun for kids with at least one parent incarcerated. And Atlanta's police department stepping up, coaching and motivating on the field.
We want these kids to grow into the God-given potential that all of them have.
Get back. Good job, man.
A donation to Prison Fellowship can literally change lives, but remember, your tax-deductible gift needs to be made before midnight on December 31st in order to be credited on your 2022 income taxes. So please go right now to HughHewitt.com and just click on the Prison Fellowship banner. Remember, there are only 3 days left in this year. That's a good thing to remember on a lot of different fronts. There's only 3 days left. Only 3 days left, before we start in on seriously on things like, I don't know, the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, and maybe even the Democrat nomination for president. Who knows what Joe Biden's going to do? Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But just to stick with Ron DeSantis a little bit here, I think it's clear that Ron DeSantis is going to get into this race. I have a bet with my good pal Adam Baldwin. If Ron gets in, I get a steak dinner. If Ron stays out, he gets a steak dinner. I think I'm cruising for a pretty good steak dinner.
Does Baldwin still think he's not getting in? I mean, still at this point, does he?
I think he's coming around to the idea that Ron DeSantis is going to get in, but he's a man of his word, and he's going to.
Oh, he'll still.
I'm going to get my steak dinner.
Pay for the dinner. He'll still pay for the dinner. But I mean, has he come around to admitting that he's going to pay for the dinner?
I don't know if he's fully come around to it yet, but I think he realizes that it's more likely than not. And the reason why is because you're talking about peaking. We were just talking about this. Ron DeSantis is setting himself up in a traditional position for governors. Once you've won that second term as governor, you know that you're going to have 4 years in office, and the first 2 years can be occupied by a presidential bid. In case that doesn't work out, you still are governor of the state, and you can come back and continue. It's been it's been almost 50 years since Ronald Reagan was. In fact, it has been 50 years. He left in '74. I take that back. It's been 49 years. It'll be 49 years. And at that time, you could retire from the governor's office and still maintain enough momentum within the party to make a credible bid for president. And of course, he lost that bid in '76. He came back and won it again in 1980. But I don't think that that's possible anymore, because I think that so many people have access to so many different politicians have access to the media machine that they can build them an online.
Right. The news cycle is such that if you don't have a platform with which to launch the next step, it's hard to do it just from the outside.
Well, I mean, take a look at you're having all sorts of people make noise now about getting into the Republican nomination campaign next year.
There's 16 of them. That are making noise.
And you're doing an excellent series with the pluses and minuses of each of these. I'm assuming that sometime next week we'll probably see one on Kristi Noem, because that seems like it's starting to.
She's all of a sudden making noise. She made the rounds on Fox. There's another interview that she granted. She's doing what Chris Sununu did last week, which is doing a media swing, and her staff revealed a Christmas present that was specially timed. She got a flamethrower for Christmas. She got a
flamethrower for Christmas. Now that's a Christmas gift. Nothing says the spirit of Christmas like a good old-fashioned flamethrower.
To light your garbage pile on fire for your weekly burnings.
And garbage pile is probably what it's going to be like next year when this thing really starts getting rolling. All right, I'm Ed Morrissey of hotair.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today from the ReliefFactor.com studios down here in Central Texas. And just to give you a brief update on the story that we started with, the Vatican is now announcing that within the last few hours, there's been a deterioration due to advancing age of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. The situation remains under control, constantly monitored by doctors. So that's the official Vatican word now out on the health of Pope Benedict XVI, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, after Pope Francis's rather surprise announcement that that prayers were needed for Pope Benedict XVI until the end. And so we'll keep an eye on that. Getting back to domestic politics once again, Title 42. There's a big day yesterday for Title 42, and frankly, a sort of confusing day in which most conservatives were probably cheering against judicial restraint, while Justice Neil Gorsuch was reminding people of what judicial restraint actually means. In the end, the people who are concerned about the border crisis got the ruling they wanted from the Supreme Court, a 5-4 split, which maintains a stay on the federal government, requires them to continue using the Title 42 emergency restrictions on asylum applicants and excluding them from entry into the country. But Dwayne, let's go to somebody who's very happy about that ruling. That would be Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich, and that would be cut number one.
Well, I am very proud of the fact that the case is actually Arizona v. Mayorkas, because we led the charge, and whether the last few years we've been leading the charge against Joe Biden trying to give public benefits, we tried to force Joe Biden to build a border wall, and now we're trying to stop him from rescinding Title 42. So we filed our pleadings this week. Justice Roberts issued a temporary stay, so we know that Title 42 will stay in effect at least until December 28th. But after that, it's an open question. And if the Supreme Court doesn't step in, we will see this continued catastrophe at our southern border. And I remind folks all the time that there is crazy, there's insane, and then there's rescinding Title 42 right now. And what Joe Biden is doing shows that I think that Secretary Mayorkas is ready for a different type of asylum, if you hear what I'm saying.
You know, this is one of those situations where I think I'm kind of rooting for everybody to lose, right? Because this is not how you were supposed to do policy, right? It's not supposed to. The Supreme Court is not supposed to decide policy. Title 42 is an emergency.
We shouldn't be in the situation.
No.
We shouldn't have to have this way out of the situation.
No.
There are all sorts of constitutional remedies available to get out of this situation.
Not even constitutional. There's all sorts of statutory ways. Congress is supposed to act.
That's
to
what I'm saying.
these things.
Do we not have a legislative body, constitutionally speaking, that can step up to the plate and pass a piece of legislation?
Well, not according to Joe Biden, who bypassed Congress and appropriated money for his student loan
that's
program.
What I'm saying. This
is a complete meltdown here.
This has been botched, 9 ways to Sunday, and now it's the policy place of last resort seems to be the court,
which is illegitimate. And Justice Gorsuch made this point. And for those of us who have been screaming about judicial restraint for the last 40 years, this is sort of embarrassing that Justice Gorsuch is saying, that outcome that you're rooting for is actually completely contradicts everything that you've been asking for the last 40 years.
Correct.
You're asking us to settle a policy question by basically fiat when this is not a judicial issue at all. It is a legislative issue in pursuit of what is supposed to be an emergency policy when there's no emergency to begin with.
Totally agree. However, we are in the position that we are in, and we can't wish ourselves in a different position from where we're at. Roberts and the conservatives on the court are seeing what an absolute nightmare it would be were Title 42 to end, literally with nothing to replace it.
I don't disagree,
So-
and I'm actually happy with the practical outcome of this order. However,
they felt like they had to do it. I don't think anybody's happy about doing it, and
they shouldn't have done it, though. They shouldn't have done it because it sets a bad precedent. And I think that Gorsuch is right in this case. I'm just going to read here. The only plausible reason for stepping in at this stage that I can discern has to do with the state's second request. The states contend that they face an immigration crisis at the border, and policymakers have failed to agree on adequate measures to address it. The only means left to mitigate the crisis, the state suggests, is an order from this court directing the federal government to continue its COVID-era Title 42 policies as long as possible, at the very least during the pendency of our review. Today, the court supplies just such an order. For my part, I do not discount the state's concerns. Even the federal government acknowledges that the end of Title 42 orders will likely have disruptive consequences. But the current border crisis is not a COVID crisis, and courts should not be in the business of perpetuating administrative edicts designed for one emergency only because elected officials have failed to address a different emergency. We are a court of law, not policymakers of last resort. And this is exactly what conservatives wanted out of a court. They wanted a Supreme Court that understood the distinction, right?
I understand that. What I'm saying is because of a colossal failure by the executive branch and the legislative branch to each do their respective jobs and come up with a policy that is a practical replacement for when this ends, Roberts felt like he had to at least create a buffer to try and convince them to do their job.
So he's Willie Chichi. He's Willie Chichi is what you're telling me.
James Langford.
The family's got a lot of buffers.
James Langford, great senator from Oklahoma and a very good conservative, said, look, the takeaway to what this basically was is the court is basically giving the DHS a little more time to come up with a policy to be able to
but see,
replace
that's,
it.
Even
they
that's
shouldn't
a
have
problem.
And I get that. And for
the policy should come from Congress. It shouldn't come from DHS.
You're absolutely right. There is a lot wrong with this on a lot of levels. We have strayed a long way from the separation of powers and what each role of government is supposed to do.
And this is my point. This is my point. When you continue to use the Supreme Court as the catcher, the catcher in the rye, the catcher in the on the border, if you will, then it sets precedents to where the Supreme Court is. I mean, let's take abortion. You can make the same argument about abortion, right? Well, the legislatures, they couldn't come up with a plan, so, we had to do Roe. I mean, you can justify an awful lot of things by saying, well, the legislature simply can't come to an agreement on that, so we're going to kick it to 9 unelected people.
And this is where you get into what Clarence Thomas said in the Dobbs decision, where he said,
who by the way was with the majority on this case. Just going to point that out.
Agreed. This is strange bedfellows in this thing. But Clarence Thomas said, Obergefell was horrible jurisprudence. That doesn't mean he's against same-sex marriage.
Right.
But he's just saying from a jurisprudential standpoint, how that case was argued was utter nonsense.
But you're right. And if that's the case, if you're going to say that on Obergefell, you have to say that on Title 42, which isn't even statute.
And if we're going to have a consistency argument here and we're going to attack people on the right for the consistency argument, there is plenty to attack on the left as well.
I'm not disputing that, but the left has not taken the position over the last 4 or 5 decades that the court shouldn't be a legislature.
No,
right?
but what I'm saying,
they think the court should be a legislature.
But what I'm saying is they are celebrating the fact they think that Gorsuch is now coming over to their side. He's one of us. He's starting to see the light. We may have at least a justice migrating our way.
No, he's a party of one. He's a party of one here.
If you take what Gorsuch wrote in his dissent and you applied it to, let's say Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness mandate,
or affirmative action, which is coming up,
the affirmative action.
Right.
If you applied that same logic, why the left isn't going to be too happy with Gorsuch?
No, he's definitely a party of one. Now, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson actually joined his opinion here, which actually amuses the heck out of me because it's very clear that this is not. This is simply a matter of convenience. I will say that the other 2 justices, Sotomayor and Kagan, had the good grace not to join Neil Gorsuch's objection here because I think they understood what
The
that
trap.
objection actually was.
Yeah,
Yes, it's a trap.
It's a trap.
This
you
is
know?
Admiral Akbar.
It's Admiral
from
Akbar. That's
Star
exactly
Wars.
right.
It's a trap. It's a trap.
Yeah. And they at least recognized. I can see where that's going. I'm not going to walk into that box canyon.
And what this is you've got 5 nominally conservative Supreme Court justices endorsing outcome-based jurisprudence, and that's wrong. They are there to do law.
Totally
They are not
agree.
there to do outcomes. It really undermines their argument in Dobbs in a very key way, because they are arguing in Dobbs that outcomes are not their business, and they're right. Alito is correct about that. Now they're arguing that outcomes are their business.
So, and you're right. So what if the outcome of this is they hear the case in February, and they decide the case so that Title 42 ends in June when the court term ends, because they don't have a role to do. I mean,
that's fine, but they've already set the precedent now that they're responsible for the outcome. That's the problem, and I think it complicates their ability to end Title 42.
I think they're trying to be too cute by half, but I think what they're trying to do is they recognize the situation just got the time bomb got dropped in their lap, and they had no one to pass the bomb on to.
They certainly do. They certainly do. They could have passed it right back to the legislature and the president and said, "This is your mess."
And then it would have ended the next day, and we would be dealing with a disaster right now.
It would be a disaster, though, that is a present disaster, not a precedent disaster. We'll be back with more. I'm Ed Morrissey, filling in for Hugh. Stay tuned.
Don't go anywhere, America. Ed Morrissey will be right back after these messages. I do want to remind you, I don't have a market report today. Edward might have I don't think anything's really going on in the market. But you might be opening up an IRA or a 401k to end 2022 and then start 2023. A lot of people, because you can open IRA until April 15th for 2022, a lot of people combine the years. They like to make their investments in the first week of January. They like to buy their gold in the first week of January, because that's the most appreciation you can get if you're counting on an investment appreciating. And if you're counting on gold as being your safety valve, your doorstop, it will never go away, head over to hughgold.com and ask for the free information kit on how Birch Gold will open and administer a third-party IRA or Roth IRA or SEP IRA or 401k for you. It's perfectly, indeed, it is very legit, and the IRS respects and understands Birch Gold, knows what they're doing. Physical, precious metals deposited under your own name in your own depository. You can touch it, you can feel it, it will not go anywhere. You're not buying a gold stock, you're not buying gold futures, you're not buying any kind of a spider with gold in it. Nothing like that, just good old-fashioned gold, the kind that you put between your teeth in the old pirate movies. I never could figure out how they could tell it was gold. But if that's you, then head over to hughgold.com, hughgold.com. I'm flying today, but you can be sure that I took my Relief Factor with me, and you can be sure that ReliefFactor.com is going to get me through the back episode that Genghis Kate inflicted upon me over the weekend. I'm just here to tell you that if you haven't taken your Relief Factor today, and Ed Morrissey has forgotten to tell you about it down in Texas, go get your Relief Factor. It costs $19.95. Be your New Year's resolution. Not only are you going to go to the gym, not only are you going to walk, not only are you going to do any of that sort of stuff, you're going to take ReliefFactor.com along with it, and you're going to do that for $19.95 for 3 weeks. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, the 3 natural supplements that combine to make the best year possible for you. That's ReliefFactor.com. Don't go anywhere. Ed Morrissey will be right back after this. Stay tuned.
The Hugh Hewitt Show is now available on TV. Go to SalemNewsChannel.com or download the app. You can also watch on Roku and Fire Stick. Salem News Channel, the antidote to the mainstream media.
Voulez-Vous. I don't know where you guys pulled that one out of. That's an awesome song by ABBA. Their disco era. I think their entire era was a disco era. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today, playing the best of the disco era here in the bumpers. It's one of my most fun things about doing the guest hosting gig here. Got a great hour coming up next. John Hinderaker of Powerline, Wesley Smith from NRO, Brian Wesbury is going to give us the First Trust Portfolios update. I want to just touch on something very quickly here as we go out of the first hour here. Tony Blinken was talking about the American support for Ukraine, and and he made a sort of an interesting argument as to why we're able to supply Ukraine with so much military support. Let's go to cut number 13.
When it comes to Russia's war against Ukraine, if we were still in Afghanistan, it would have, I think, made much more complicated the support that we've been able to give and that others have been able to give Ukraine to resist and push back against the Russian aggression.
That's absolute nonsense. First off, our commitment to the Afghans was running us about $7 billion a year. I mean, it wasn't an enormous amount of money. How much money did we spend on Ukraine this year? And I'm not quibbling about this because I'm actually supportive of the administration's position on Ukraine, but we spend a lot more than $7 billion on Ukraine. And this is an administration that likes to come up with money out of thin air anyway. So I'm not exactly even sure what this means. Why?
The amount of money at the time that the Biden administration pulled out of Afghanistan, casualties were basically at zero, or as close.
Casualties were.
American casualties were basically at zero, and it was as cost-free of a foreign policy enterprise.
Well, it wasn't entirely cost-free. I mean, let's be realistic. I think it was about $7 billion a year that we were spending on support for the Afghanistan mission.
Whereas what we're spending in Ukraine right now, I think the ask that just got attached to the NDA was $45 billion.
45 or 44 billion, and that wasn't the first time that we've sent money over there.
Which is still cheap at half the price if that is how you're going to engage and basically use a proxy to destroy the Russian military complex.
Yes, and I agree with that. And I think
I do too. But
I mean,
again,
and by the way, and the reason why I agree with that is not that I think it was America's duty to go out and destroy the Russian military complex, but once Putin actually engaged in an invasion of Ukraine, he's got it coming to him, and Russia's got it coming to them. And the more that we can help Ukraine chew up the Russian military, the safer it makes the rest of us. And so I have no problem with the policy. I think that this is one of the few areas in which I agree with the Biden administration.
We were at a point where if you look at the overall amount of money that we spend on the defense budget, and it should have been more even then, but regardless, the money that we spend on defense annually, $7 billion for what the operations were in Afghanistan is a literal drop in the bucket.
Well, and again, this is an administration that thinks it's got a monopoly on the money tree, right? They don't.
Right.
They're not saying, we couldn't spend $45 billion in Ukraine because we still have to spend $7 billion in Afghanistan, and we don't have any more billions left. Joe Biden makes up billions in his head. He makes up trillions in his head.
So that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. We can't
ludicrous.
Cover Afghanistan and have been able to cover this. Is a nonsensical argument. But at the same time, we had voices like Mike Pompeo and Robert O'Brien and Tom Cotton and many other people that criticized the Afghan withdrawal and basically at the time said this is provocative. It's going to provoke people like Vladimir Putin. It's going to provoke people like Xi Jinping in China. And they're going to see that the U.S. doesn't keep its commitments, it doesn't have resolve, and it's weak. And weakness is provocative. There has been lots of voices that have looked at what Putin did and said the reason Putin even took the step in Ukraine was triggered, at least partially, by Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan.
I think it could have been triggered partially. I mean, Putin had invaded Ukraine a couple of times. He'd seized Crimea. He had used proxy armies to seize control of portions of the Donbass. That was in 2014. We were still fully committed to Afghanistan at the time.
Understand, but when Blinken says we couldn't give this much support to Ukraine if we were still in Afghanistan, you could actually make the counter argument that we wouldn't have had to deal with Putin in Ukraine had we kept our commitment. And
I think it's a legitimate argument. I think that there's more nuance to it than that, but I think it's a legitimate argument. But the idea that somehow the way that we bailed out on our Afghan allies, the disgraceful, shameful way in which we abandoned Americans,
and
14,000 Americans,
and Blinken is still trying to take.
He's justifying
credit. He's trying to take credit for how successful the withdrawal was.
He's rationalizing away abandoning 14,000 Americans in Afghanistan to the Taliban, tens of thousands of Afghan allies to the Taliban.
So he's got no credibility on the issue to begin with, and he should have one of these moments when
Jonah Hill thing.
The Jonah Hill thing when talking about Afghanistan. Don't talk, Tony Blinken. Don't talk about Afghanistan. That's
all right. When we come back, though, we're not going to be talking about Afghanistan. We're going to be talking with John Hinderaker about blackouts and power and all sorts of fun stuff. Stick around. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I won't be on the show today. Ed Morrissey is guest hosting for me today. I'm winging my way from the Beltway to Studio West, from 0 degrees to 70 degrees. Although I hear it's raining, but I don't want to taunt you too much. Ed Morrissey coming right up. Stay tuned. A great Hugh Hewitt show ahead.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel. Portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm not there. I'm in the air. Actually, I'm flying from the Beltway back to California for a couple of months. I'm going to be doing some teaching, going to be doing some anything but freezing because the Beltway is that. Luckily, Edward Morrissey the First, Ed the Great, is here to bring you into the new year with a little Texas talk. Thank you, Ed, for sitting in today, and take it away.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt today from the ReliefFactor.com studios here, deep in the heart of Texas, where we have power and pretty much always have power. We used to talk about rolling blackouts as being pretty much a feature of my native state of California, thanks to a lot of really bad governing decisions that California has made over the last few decades, but especially in the last few years. I have now discovered, however, that rolling blackouts have become sort of a national fad, and all for pretty much the same reasons. Joining us to talk about that after writing a brilliant post yesterday at PowerlineBlog.com, John Hinderaker, also from Center of the American Experiment right there in Minnesota. John, do you have power on today?
Ed, it's great to be with you. Yeah, right now we have power, although Minnesota is one of the Midwestern states, plus Arkansas and Louisiana, that are under MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent Systems Operator, and MISO has warned that its entire region, the Midwest plus those two southern states, is at high risk of blackouts this winter. And if we do have blackouts, we are going to join a lot of other states that have been experiencing them just over the last few days.
You know, John, it's not like you guys need power in Minnesota, right? Because it's, you know, it's always nice and balmy. You can get out, and you got plenty of sunlight up there. You can do all the stuff that you don't need that power, right? I mean, winter is a perfect time for these things.
And in January in Minnesota, you can always go out and sleep under the trees.
Yeah, something like that.
You know, Ed, people who understand energy, understand the grid and how the system operates, have been saying for years that blackouts are inevitable if we continue this mad dash to wind and solar energy. As you know, my organization, American Experiment, I think has got the top energy group in the United States, and they've been putting out paper after paper analyzing electricity power in a variety of states. And they've been saying for several years that we are on the road to blackouts, and as of this winter, we have arrived.
I mean, it's really shocking because it really puts us in sort of third world status in terms of being able to support our communities, especially in the wintertime. I mean, this is. I mean, I'm joking. I lived in Minnesota for 23 years. You know, we've been friends for a very long time up there. This is a very, very bad time of the year to not have power on.
Well, it is, Ed. There's no doubt about that. But the other thing is the summer when people turn on their air conditioning. Yeah. We're going to see exactly the same thing. So just a few days ago, they were having rolling blackouts. The Tennessee Valley Authority, you know, the jewel of the New Deal, can no longer keep the lights on, so they're having rolling blackouts in Tennessee. And the mayor of Nashville asked the Tennessee Titans to push back the starting time for their football game so they could join with other businesses in reducing electricity use as part of the effort to keep the lights on. 500,000 people in North Carolina were in the dark, no electricity. Warnings going out from the Appalachian Power Company and other utilities. And Ed, you know, if our listeners want to know why is this happening, you know, it didn't happen in our parents' day, right?
Right.
I mean, we've had a reliable electric grid for decades in the United States. We never had to worry about these things. Well, the answer is billions and billions, maybe into the trillions now, of dollars have been wasted on wind turbines and solar panels, and these utilities have been retiring reliable energy sources, which is to say nuclear power plants and coal-fired power plants, and trying to replace them with wind turbines and solar panels. But the reality is it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter how many wind turbines you erect, how many billions you spend, because when the wind doesn't blow, they don't produce any electricity, and wind turbines only produce electricity about 40% of the time. 60% of the time, they don't do anything.
You know, this is the problem, I think, when we're talking about it, the problem is scalability, right? I mean, you can certainly argue, hey, you can have some wind farms, you can have some solar farms. I don't really have any particular opposition to that. I have opposition to subsidizing them, but I don't have opposition to people who want to build those things, but they're not scalable. Whereas coal power, natural gas power, nuclear power, those are scalable. As demand increases, you can scale the output. You can't do that from a solar farm. There's only, you get the sunshine and that's it. You get the wind and that's it.
Well, one of the things I did in this post, Ed, as you know, is I put up a chart that's from MISO that shows the contributions of the various sources of electricity hour by hour, day by day, over 1 week in December. And one of the things that it shows is that solar power at utility scale is absolutely worthless. Yep. I just can't say that strongly enough. Solar energy at utility scale level is absolutely worthless. It contributes zero. And wind turbines fluctuate all over the place. You know, sometimes the wind is blowing, oh yeah, they actually produce some electricity. Other times the wind doesn't blow, oops, they produce nothing. And so what they do is they fire up the natural gas. And so the two energy sources that actually work and that supply the overwhelming majority of our electricity are coal and natural gas. Nuclear could do it too, but we're shutting down nuclear plants and we're not building any new ones. And so this is the situation we're in, Ed. And I can tell you, I can't name the state, but one of the Midwestern states hired the energy people in my organization to analyze the risk of blackouts in that state this winter and next winter. You know, it's a very, very real problem, and it is upon us, and it's only going to get worse if we continue this green energy fad.
Right, it is a fad. I mean, this is a self-inflicted disaster. It's slow-moving disaster, but it's a self-inflicted disaster that's coming at us here. This is not a lack of resources. This is a lack of what's a good word to put into this?
Well, it's basically sound policy.
Thank you, lack of sound policy. Yes,
we had an electric grid that was the envy of the world, and we are in the process of disassembling it.
Do you see any signs of hope that these bad policy decisions are being reversed? Not in California. I mean, I think California is long gone. It's going to be a long time before they reverse those decisions in California. But I mean, the Midwest, the South Appalachian territory. I mean, those are areas where conservatives actually have some draw.
Well, in Texas, Texas has had blackouts, so that was kind of a unique situation. But the root cause of it was, in fact, reliance on wind turbines.
It was. Yeah, it was the same problem.
The short answer to your question is, the propaganda, the green propaganda is so overwhelming. It begins in kindergarten, and it never stops. And the majority of the population at this point really have no idea what's going on. And of course, the news media are trying to enlighten them. But here's the thing, Ed. The first time you flip the switch and the lights don't go on, it's a problem. And what we're seeing now, and maybe some of our listeners maybe don't realize what a rolling blackout is. A rolling blackout is when a utility deliberately cuts power to some of its customers. Why does it do that? Because if it doesn't, the entire system is going to crash and go down. Right. So rolling blackouts are the way that a utility staves off complete disaster by inflicting disaster on a portion of its customers. That's what a rolling blackout is. And we are cruising toward a just intolerable situation where America is becoming a third world country where you cannot rely at any moment on having electricity.
You know what we should do in that case, John? We should actually just throw all of our cars onto the grid too. Because clearly that's a useful policy.
Right? Oh, God. Robert Bryce is a terrific energy expert located down where you are in Texas, has calculated that if you really wanted to fuel the entire energy grid with wind turbines, it wouldn't work. You'd still have blackouts. But if you really tried to do it, you'd have to dedicate an area twice the size of the state of California to wind turbines. Now, that's with current demand for electricity. Currently in the U.S., I think around 2% of our cars are electric vehicles. If if they insist that all the cars and all the trucks and all the work vehicles, enormous work vehicles of various kinds, are supposed to run on electricity, there's just no conceivable way that the electricity is available to fuel that need. And by the way, the watchword right now among utilities is what they call demand management. And demand management means either inducing or forcing customers to reduce their consumption of electricity. So always in the past, the idea was, okay, there's this much need for electricity among the people. The utility's job is to meet the need.
Yep.
Now they're reversing that. Your job is to stop using electricity.
John Hinderaker, PowerlineBlog.com, at HinderakerJohn on Twitter. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today. There are only 3 days left of 2022. Man, that's amazing. And a lot of people are looking for year-end tax deductions. And if you act today, I can help secure one for you. Just go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Prison Fellowship banner. Many of you donated to Hugh's Prison Fellowship Angel Tree campaign, but the great work of Prison Fellowship continues throughout the year, offering thousands of incarcerated men and women the opportunity to participate in Prison Fellowship Academy, which literally changes lives and prepares them to transition back to their home communities when their sentences are completed, and impacting over 300,000 children of prisoners through Angel Tree summer camps and other youth-oriented activities like this Angel Tree sports camp in Atlanta.
First up, let's go.
Over 120 kids participating in Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree program in Atlanta, a day of football and fun for kids with at least one parent incarcerated. And Atlanta's police department stepping up, coaching and motivating on the field.
We want these kids to grow into the God-given potential that all of them have.
Get back. Good job, man.
A donation to Prison Fellowship can literally change lives, but remember, your tax-deductible gift needs to be made before midnight on December 31st in order to be credited on your 2022 income taxes. So please go right now to HughHewitt.com and just click on the Prison Fellowship banner. Remember, there are only 3 days left in this year. 3 days, my goodness. It seems like longer. I don't know. It seems like this year's been longer, and perhaps it's because we have people like Kathy Hochul who have decided that no matter what the weather is, it's global warming. Let's go to cut number 3.
Last night I had to bring in the National Guard. The conditions, the blinding snow, the zero visibility, absolute whiteouts, it may go down as one of the worst in history. People are comparing this to the dreaded blizzard of '77, where Buffalo first got its reputation for having an unprecedented amount of snow. We broke that record again a month ago. So it's very clear to me that the effects of climate change are wreaking havoc everywhere.
Wait a minute. Climate change.
Heads I win, tails you lose.
So lots of snow, like we got in 1977, is climate change. And it's cold weather rather than hot weather.
In Buffalo.
In Buffalo.
In the winter.
I am shocked.
In the dead of winter, we have snow and blizzards in Buffalo.
I am shocked to find out that there's lake effect snow in Buffalo.
Didn't we read stories, Ed? I mean, you're a purveyor of news. You read this stuff as much as I do. Do you not reading all the dire warnings from the climate alarmists saying that snow?
A new ice age was coming?
Snow.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm older than you are. I remember when.
I remember global cooling. I remember that from the 70s as well. And then all of a sudden, that didn't quite work, and so they just flipped it on its axis, and it was global warming. And then it became climate change. But what I'm saying is we read just in the last year, just in the last 6 months, even we were reading stories that to Americans, snow was going to be a thing of the past.
Yeah, we've been hearing that for 15 years. Ever since I've been blogging, they've been making that prediction.
Kids were gonna be in the future. We're gonna look at snow the way kids right now look at compact discs.
Right, and they're talking about the polar vortex. We didn't get polar vortexes before global warming. Of course we did. We just didn't call them polar vortexes. We didn't have the satellite imagery to tell us that they were polar vortexes. We've been having winter like this for many, many, many a moon.
Every year, somewhere in the deep south, it gets really cold for a period of time because
it's winter.
Because of atmospheric conditions.
Because it's winter.
Yes.
And it gets hot in the summer because it's summer.
It's summer, yes.
And it's this type of nonsense that drives the stuff that John was talking about. It's the reason why I wanted to come back and just close the loop with what John Hinderaker was talking about. It's this kind of nonsense that drives that. It's like no matter what the weather is, it's global warming, and you have to stop using reliable forms of energy. And just hope that you get enough wind and sunlight to power the minimal amount of activity that people like Kathy Hochul want you to have.
So the only solution to any possible extremity of weather, the only solution is to give leftists more power and control.
That's exactly what this is about. And you can tell because the program hasn't changed since they were talking about global cooling 50 years ago. which I do remember, and which was
I
a
do
thing.
As well.
All right. When we come back, we're going to talk to Wesley Smith about what Sweden's doing in terms of gender-affirming care. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Stay tuned. Welcome back. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today from the ReliefFactor.com studios here in Central Texas. Joining me now is Wesley Smith, Discovery Institute Chair of the Center of Human Exceptionalism at the Wesley J. Smith on Twitter and also at National Review, where he has a great article up talking about Sweden's new response to, I'm using scare quotes here, gender-affirming care for children. Wesley, great to have you back with us, by the way.
Thanks for having me, Ed. Good to talk to you again. Good morning.
Well, it's always good to talk to somebody from the People's Republic of Santa Monica, or, I...
Hey, I'm in Virginia now.
Oh, well, see, you got smart. I'm in Texas now, so there you go. We wised up. Both of us wised up. Let's talk about what the American response is first to gender-affirming care, because, frankly, I've really felt despair over how far off the rails this has actually gone. This used to be a real marginal thing, and now it's suddenly become faddish, and to the extent where we're really doing a tremendous amount of damage to young people that I think are going to be very, very angry in about 10 or 15 years about what the medical establishment here in America has done to them.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a proliferation of lawsuits, and in fact, it's beginning already. There have been a couple filed. Unfortunately, I think we're in the middle of a social panic in this country with regard to this issue, particularly on the left. The Biden administration is insisting that the only approach when a child questions their sex is what's called gender-affirming care. That is, you immediately say, oh, yes, you are the other sex. Okay, yes, we will change your pronouns, social affirmation. Yes, you can wear clothes of the other sex. And then very quickly, often this goes into what's called medical affirmation. I think it's a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. But things such as puberty blocking, meaning preventing natural puberty in children, cross-hormone interventions and so forth, and also surgeries. There was a recent study out of Vanderbilt that said that hundreds of minor girls are given mastectomies every year, and this was back in 2019. It was like 500. I bet now it's 1,000 at least. And the median age, get this, was 16, meaning half of the girls who had their breasts removed were under age 16, and as low as 12. And in rare cases, there are even genital surgeries done on minors. Mostly they wait till they're 18, but it does happen. And this is all experimental, but the American approach in the New England Journal of Medicine, which has become the New England Ideological Journal of Medicine, says, well, this is the only approach, and if you don't do it this way, you're a hater, and it's wrong.
You make the point here, or at least that you quote the New England Journal of Medicine as making a point that mental health treatment for gender dysphoria is equivalent to conversion therapy. They're literally physically converting girls girls and boys into neuters is what they're actually converting them to, while telling them that they're converting them from girls to boys and boys to girls. That, to me, is a much worse type of conversion therapy than just talking through issues. And yet you've got the New England Journal of Medicine who apparently feels that therapy is more damaging than surgery, which is amazing to me. And you're right. I mean, it's completely an ideological point of view here.
And it turns out that the science doesn't back it.
Right.
Certainly the science doesn't back it in the sense of, well, it's as settled as gravity, right? Because you now have a lot of Western European countries beginning to really hit the brakes. The United Kingdom has hit the brakes on puberty blocking and surgery, says that the NHS has said, a lot of times these feelings in children are transitory. That's the term they use. France has said there's been an awful explosion of numbers here. We have to be careful. We're hitting the brakes. Finland is hitting the brakes. And most recently, Sweden, their health ministry basically said, we're hitting the brakes. Because, and let me read, this is from the statement of the Swedes. Several factors have pointed toward increased caution in offering hormonal and surgical treatment. Insufficient scientific evidence. A yet-to-be-explained increase in the number of people being diagnosed, especially 13 to 17-year-olds. Less uniform experience-based knowledge among participating experts then in 2015 and the documented prevalence of detransition. They're saying caution. That's the watchword. Be very deliberate, be very careful. And our country, especially the administration, the Democrat Party with the Equality Act and so forth, are saying full steam ahead. Well, who cares more for children? And let me point out, Sweden, UK, France, Finland, which has done the same thing. They're not Bible Belt countries. These are socially liberal countries. So the idea that somehow it's a hater to want to have real caution when it comes to these children is ridiculous.
We're speaking with Wesley Smith, Discovery Institute Chair of the Center of Human Exceptionalism, as well as a featured writer at National Review Online, and we're talking about his column at NRO right now. And Wesley, why is America so prone to these social panics, while apparently Europe seems to be at least a little bit more resistant to them? I'm a little surprised by that, frankly. Maybe I shouldn't be. I mean, I grew up in the 1970s, and we just got done talking about population bomb and all that kind of stuff. And through the satanic preschool era, right, when we had this big social panic about that going on, and all sorts of different social panics. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I still am. What is culturally different here than it is in Europe, in Finland, Sweden, and the UK?
I think, I'm not an expert on that answer at all, but it would seem to me that in Europe you have much more of an idea of a communal society, and we're highly individualistic.
Right.
I tend to like that we're highly individualistic, but I think that the highly individualistic nature of the United States has us kind of hell-bent on making sure that whenever an individual wants something, they get it. We've also in this country become more rights-oriented and less responsibilities-oriented. And I think that's also true with regard to children. I mean, this is off the topic a bit, but these drag queens for 5-year-olds shows kind of show something, I think, that we're missing something. We've lost a sense of common sense.
Yep.
That, and I think it's pushed by social media here, which I think is much more contagious here than it is perhaps in Europe.
Well, I think social media is really part of the answer, but I don't think that's off topic at all. I mean, I think that there has been an ongoing effort to sexualize children in the United States, and part of that is being expressed in this transgender social panic, as you put it. The rapid expansion of gender dysphoria among kids is in part because of this campaign of sexualization that's been going on for years and years and years. And I mean, I was talking about this on my video program with Adam Baldwin at Hot Air. About how this goes back decades. I mean, you go back, and this goes back in Europe decades, right? In 1968 in Germany and France, you had these communes that were explicitly about breaking down sexual taboos between adults and children as freeing people from the capitalist model and, being able to transform the next generation into the new socialist person, if you will. This has been something that the hard left has been pursuing for a long time, and I think it's also part of the sort of the effort to undermine objective truth in favor of, and this gets back to your point about individualism, about your own truth, right? Where you're basically the center of the universe, and your feelings are more important than actual facts and biology. This is just the fullest expression of that.
Yeah, let me interrupt just for a quick second. One of the things that really makes this so destructive generally, I'm not just talking about the children issue, is that it is the triumph of the subjective.
Yes.
That whatever I feel inside is right. But feelings are transitory. We always say, well, I feel this, I feel that, instead of I think this, I think that. And I think that makes a very big difference in how we approach life, how we approach problems. We need to get back to thinking. And we also need to get back to the idea of restraint, that we don't have to necessarily do something because it feels good to us at this moment. And I think it's really civilizational destruction here. If everything becomes subjective, then there's no foundation, solid foundation upon which a society can rest and can be built upon, because everything is going to be in a constant churn and a constant hysteria.
And it's interesting in an era where we're constantly demanded to follow the science, right? I mean, that's been the mantra for the last couple of years during the pandemic. You got to follow the science. The science says, science this, science that. We're really almost into a scientism sort of era.
We're well into a scientism era.
Right, you and I have discussed that before. But in the midst of all this scientism, you've got people saying, well, ignore biology, which makes no sense whatsoever, except in the way that you have just expressed it, which is an effort to basically undermine all objective truth, all objective facts, in favor of whatever it is that you're feeling at the moment. The reason why is because feelings are easily manipulated. Facts and science are, well, I don't want to say science. We've seen science manipulated quite a bit, but objective facts resist manipulation, and I think that's the key.
Science, the scientific method, requires give and take and discourse and debate. And what's really happened here, and you saw it with social media particularly, and what Twitter is revealing is really important, is that people who have said, wait a second, we shouldn't be cutting off the breasts of 14-year-old girls, have been silenced on social media. They've been canceled because the idea was, well, they're going against the science. Well, when you do things like that, when you stifle scientific discussion and debate, that's anti-science.
We've been speaking with Wesley Smith, Discovery Institute Chair of the Center of Human Exceptionalism. Read his great essay at nationalreview.com on this particular subject. Thank you so much for being with us. When we come back, we'll be talking with Brian Wesbury about the markets, what's going on in the markets this week. I think Hugh is wrong. I think there's a lot going on. We'll talk more about that. I'm Ed Morrissey, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back.
Don't go anywhere, America. Ed Morrissey will be right back after these messages. I do want to remind you, I don't have a market report today. Edward might have I don't think anything's really going on in the market. But you might be opening up an IRA or a 401k to end 2022 and then start 2023. A lot of people, because you can open IRA until April 15th for 2022, a lot of people combine the years. They like to make their investments in the first week of January. They like to buy their gold in the first week of January because that's the most appreciation you can get if you're counting on an investment appreciating. And if you're counting on gold as being your safety valve, your doorstop, it will never go away, head over to hughgold.com and ask for the free information kit on how Birch Gold will open and administer a third-party IRA or Roth IRA or SEP IRA or 401k for you. It's perfectly, indeed, it is very legit, and the IRS respects and understands Birch Gold, knows what they're doing. Physical, precious metals deposited under your own name in your own depository. You can touch it, you can feel it, it will not go anywhere. You're not buying a gold stock, you're not buying gold futures, you're not buying any kind of a spider with gold in it. Nothing like that, just good old-fashioned gold, the kind that you put between your teeth in the old pirate movies. I never could figure out how they could tell it was gold. But if that's you, then head over to hughgold.com, hughgold.com. I'm flying today, but you can be sure that I took my Relief Factor with me, and you can be sure that ReliefFactor.com is going to get me through the back episode that Genghis Kate inflicted upon me over the weekend. I'm just here to tell you that if you haven't taken your Relief Factor today, and Ed Morrissey has forgotten to tell you about it down in Texas, go get your Relief Factor. It costs $19.95. Be your New Year's resolution. Not only are you going to go to the gym, not only are you going to walk, not only are you going to do any of that sort of stuff, you're going to take ReliefFactor.com along with it, and you're going to do that for $19.95 for 3 weeks. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, the three natural supplements that combine to make the best year possible for you. That's ReliefFactor.com. Don't go anywhere. Ed Morrissey will be right back after this. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt today. Should we be freaking out at the market, or is the market freaking out, or is the market doing anything? Joining us right now to talk to us about that is Brian Wesbury, senior economist at First Trust Portfolios at Wesbury on Twitter. And Brian, Hugh says nothing's happening in the markets this week. I don't trust Hugh. I trust you. You tell us what's happening in the markets this week.
Yes. Well, the market's still trying to figure out whether we will have a recession in 2023. I think we will, and I think earnings, profits are going to fall. So the problem that the market's had in 2022, this year, which is almost over now, was that interest rates went up. Next year, the problem is that it's going to be hard to maintain profits because we goosed them during COVID. And, Ed, the analogy that I've used is the COVID lockdowns, they were, well, I don't know if you agree, but they were wrong in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that's like having a car accident. And then the ambulance shows up and they pump you full of morphine. You get to the emergency room, the doc says, "How you feeling?" And you say, "I feel great." and he says, "No, you're not. You have a broken leg." And so the point I'm getting to is that we got used to these profits going up, but it was all because we borrowed from the future and printed all this money, and that's going away in 2023. So I don't think the markets are going to have a problem digesting it, but it's not going to be fun for investors.
Well, I mean, let's talk a little bit about that too, because a lot of the money that that was dispersed, some of it went to companies, some of it went to individuals, and some of that was sheltered. I mean, people were kind of putting some of that away, but that's pretty much dissipated at this point in time, right? The savings rate's gone back down to pre-pandemic levels, and put simply, the reserve isn't there any longer, and I think people are still almost expecting to get another tranche of free cash here to help them through this, and I don't think that there's any will in Congress to do that right now, and nor should they.
No,
it's a bad idea. I'm not suggesting it. I'm just saying I think that people are still kind of expecting a little bit more of Uncle Sugar to step in here.
Yeah, that's we have this phrase we use, quiet quitting, where people just don't want to work. We have this new bohemian class, or however we want to think of it. And I do believe you're absolutely right that it's because people keep waiting for the next round of checks to come. But at this point, I agree with you. They are over. There isn't. We just passed this huge bill, but it didn't include any direct payments to individuals, and that's going to slow things down. One of the morphine, if you will, the injections that we had is that we kept services closed down, but we especially allowed the big public companies, Amazon, Home Depot, Target, Walmart, all of them were allowed to stay open. And because we were handing out all those checks, during COVID, we're locked down. 30 billion hours of work were lost, and yet we spent $1.3 trillion more on goods than we would have if COVID never happened.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. We borrowed from our kids, and we spent it all on ourselves during 2021 and early 2022.
So I've argued that what we're seeing here is got some echoes from the 2008 market crash. Not necessarily the fundamentals of why we got inflation, because that's also part of that. But I'm talking about the response to the emergency, where we flooded the market with cash and we created these incentives not to work, and you end up with this big overhang in the workforce. And we got about maybe a minute left here. Do you see the same parallels here, and do you see the same sort of faulty responses coming out of this that we saw 13 years ago?
Absolutely, Ed. I totally 100% agree with that view. And if we go back in history, and it's not just America but everywhere, politicians love crisis because then they get to grow their power. And during in the financial bubble of 2007, housing subprime stuff, We passed TARP, and then Obama followed up with $800 billion more of spending after Bush did the TARP, and then we also did quantitative easing, and we sort of got through that. And everybody thinks, well, boy, we got through that. We didn't pay a big price for it. And so what we did is we tripled down this time, and it didn't work because we ended up with all this inflation. There's all kinds of nuanced analysis of that, but you are absolutely right. We dumped money into the economy. We gave a lot of morphine in '08, and we just did it all over again in 2020 and 2021.
Which means that we're going to be paying for it in 2023 and 2024 and so on and so on. Brian Wesbury, thank you very much for being with us. That's the outlook on the markets. Just want to make sure that everybody understands that I was right. There's things going on in the markets, and Brian Wesbury was here to talk to us about that. We're going to talk more about economics when we come back from the break with my friend King Banaian of St. Cloud State University and of the Salem affiliate, AM 1280, The Patriot and the Businessman. I'm Ed Morrissey, filling in for Hugh Hewitt. Stay tuned.
portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm not there. I'm in the air. Actually, I'm flying from the Beltway back to California for a couple of months. I'm going to be doing some teaching, going to be doing some anything but freezing because the Beltway is that. Luckily, Edward Morrissey the First, Ed the Great, is here to bring you into the new year with a little Texas talk. Thank you, Ed, for sitting in today, and take it away.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt today while he's on his travel day from the ReliefFactor.com studios here in Central Texas. I was planning on spending the entire hour on a retrospective of 50 years of the Immaculate Reception and Pittsburgh Steelers dominance, because I know that Hugh would really have appreciated that in his absence. However, I got an opportunity to spend this hour with three great friends, the first of which is King Banaian from the business 1440 KYCR, out of Minneapolis, St. Paul. He's also at St. Cloud State University, and we're going to talk about economics a little bit more. You know, King, we were just talking with Brian Wesbury about the markets, but I want to talk more about what's happening in the broader economic world here. We're looking at a strong possibility of recession, but the numbers did seem to kind of improve this month here.
Yeah, I agree, Ed, and good morning and Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas.
I think this is a very hard recession to forecast. I have sort of people have told me I'm dragging my feet to get there, but you still have numbers going strong. I just yesterday we reported out the Christmas sales numbers from MasterCard, and they were better than I think people expected. The consumer's still shopping. There's still money sloshing around the system from those stimulus bills in 2020 and 2021, and I think collectively they're keeping a floor under the economy. So as recessions go, this is an odd one, and there's good reason, I think, to believe that it will be a mild one if we do have it.
You know, just to clarify, because I did see the report from MasterCard that we haven't seen the official government reports, you know, like on retail sales reports, for instance, from Census Bureau or Bureau of Economic Analysis. But they were saying that November 1 to December, I think December 24th probably, that consumer activity was up 7.6%. Was that inflation adjusted or was that nominal?
It's nominal. It's not inflation adjusted, and so depending on which inflation measure you use, you know, that real number might be anything between 0.5% and 2%. It's not huge, but it's something. It's positive, which is I think more than some people expected.
Right, exactly, and I think that when I saw that, it was like. Because the numbers for, I think it was the retail sales numbers from November looked really bad from BEA. Yeah. And I was thinking, oh goodness, they just shifted all the demand into October with the sales, right? Because there was a lot of discounting that was going on in October. Something similar has happened the last couple of years because of the pandemic, where retailers were shifting their big discounts earlier in the cycle, and so the demand was shifting. People were buying their Christmas presents earlier. But the report from MasterCard seems to negate that. It looks like the level of spending actually remained pretty constant.
Right. When we get the December numbers, the official numbers from Census, we'll have a better clue of what happened. That's a few weeks out yet. But clearly, what's been happening has been sort of this moving around of sales. I mean, 2 months ago, the story was retailers had way too much inventory, and they were discounting to try to move some of that inventory out. They might have the wrong inventory. And then, of course, you got to December, and we spent a few weeks where China wasn't sending as many goods, and the ports weren't full of imports. And so this whole quarter has been very strange in terms of how you try to forecast what's happening, let alone what's going on in 23. We're not even sure what's happening right this moment.
Well, you know, and it's a great point, and it's because there's so many moving parts right now. You've got the Fed that has been rapidly raising their what we used to call prime interest rate. I'm not sure what the official designation is for it right now, but right now it's, I believe, between 4.25% and 4.5%. That's a dramatic change from a year ago, and they're trying to basically kill demand by raising the interest rates. We could talk about the lack of supply-side economics going on, the supply-side policy coming from Congress and the administration, which is really how it should have been, how this, inflation should have been fought. This is the only tool that the Fed has. But 4.5% is still fairly historically low. And so normally you'd see that around 6%, 6.5%. I mean, we're coming off of a decade or longer than a decade of historic lows since the financial collapse in 2008.
Well, Chairman Jay Powell of the Federal Reserve has been saying, you're probably not just saying we're just now getting to a point where it's restrictive. Even that is low by historical standards. You're right about that, Ed. But what we really do need to see is that the Fed funds rate gets above where we think the inflation rate is in the economy. And I mean, there is no measure that would get me a number that is as low as 4.5%. So I still don't think we're in a restrictive space. I still think the Fed has to go a little bit higher. And you're right, it's only going to close off demand, and that's basically the only tool the Fed has in the toolbox. And if Congress is not going to do much more than continue with continuing resolutions, it's the only tool that's left to do anything at all.
Right. I mean, a lot of people are criticizing the Fed for this, but the Fed doesn't really have any choice here. The Fed created part of this policy with its cheap money, or created part of the crisis here with 13 years of cheap money policies. The only thing they can do is correct those policies at this point in time. It's really up to Congress and the administration to take other actions in support. But a few months back, you and I were talking, and you mentioned that the PCE index, right? Mm-hmm. And you said, don't look at the overall rate of inflation, the CPI rate of inflation. Don't look at PPI. Look at the PCE index of inflation, because that's what the Fed looks at. And you gave me some great advice, which I have stolen and claimed as my own ever since, as I am wont to do. But you said when the Fed rate comes into consonance with that PCE index rate, that's when you can expect to see the inflation rate start to fall. And we're getting close to that now. At the time, it was like 6 points, right? It was like six percentage points separated. Now we're within about a percentage point. If you look at the last PCE index, I think was 5.5% from 2 weeks ago, and we're at between 4.25% and 4.5%. So, do you expect to see maybe one more Fed increase rate, and then we'll start to see inflation really start to tail off? Or do you think that we're just not really sure?
I don't think. I think the Fed's trying to signal that there's more than one increase coming in 2023. I think they expect to get the rate up to at least 5%, and I think they probably will go past 5 to 5.25, 5.5. The rate they look at is what's called core PCE. That's currently 4.7%. You kind of need to get to at least 1 percentage point over that number to get where they are. So at the last FOMC press conference, Jay Powell tells the audience, tells the press corps, hey, we were actually paying attention to services core PCE. So he's narrowing it even further, and his point, he's trying to point at wage increases, and he's basically saying wage inflation is the biggest issue for 2023. So you have to watch what's going on with wage inflation, and as long as that number's north of 5%, I think the Fed will continue to raise until it sees that turnaround.
And I think that this is important too, because these increases, while they're not really, I mean, this is not historically high interest rates. These aren't the interest rates of 1979, 1980, not by any stretch of the imagination, but just the motion and the rapidity of the motion here in scaling these things upward really does have tremendous impacts. We're seeing it in housing markets, for instance, and certainly going to be part of any new investment that's going to be taking place, because business loans are going to cost more. The issue, I think, here is how long do these impacts last? I mean, you can get inflation down, and that's great in the short run, but will all of this pain extend much farther? Excuse me, than the near solution, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think the pain will last for a little while. I don't think the recession is going to be terribly long or terribly painful unless something that we don't expect happens. Like in China or in Russia, but I think internally we're not in that place. I think that investment is cooling some, but has yet to really decline too much, because the shortage of workers is inducing business to invest in productivity enhancing machinery, equipment, technology to try to supplement the workers that they are able to hire. And so I don't see that coming down so much. So I really do think that what they're working on is really that consumer demand. There's still, by various measures, Jason Furman's had charts about saying something like $1.25 to $1.5 trillion of stimulus money is still saved, and they still need to burn that off. So what I think they need to do is they'll look to get that worked out by maybe the middle of the year, and then maybe we're out of the recession by the end of the third quarter.
King Banaian from the King Banaian Show on 1440 KYCR in the Twin Cities, at Banaian Show on Twitter. Thank you so much. I'm Ed Morrissey, filling in for Hugh Hewitt. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com filling in for Hugh today. Before you get a chance to celebrate good times on New Year's Eve, you've got 3 days left in 2022, and a lot of people are still looking for a year-end tax deduction, and I've got one for you today. If you act today, I can help secure one for you. Just go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Prison Fellowship banner. Many of you donated to Hugh's Prison Fellowship Angel Tree campaign, but the great work of Prison Fellowship continues throughout the year, offering thousands of incarcerated men and women the opportunity to participate in the Prison Fellowship Academy, which literally changes lives and prepares them to transition back to their home communities when their sentences are completed. And they also impact over 300,000 children of prisoners through Angel Tree summer camps and other youth-oriented activities like this Angel Tree Sports Camp in Atlanta.
First up, let's go.
Over 120 kids participating in Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree program in Atlanta. A day of football and fun for kids with at least one parent incarcerated. And Atlanta's police department stepping up, coaching and motivating on the field.
We want these kids to grow into the God-given potential that all of them have.
Get back. Good job, man.
A donation to Prison Fellowship can literally change lives. But remember, your tax-deductible gift needs to be made before midnight on December 31st in order to be credited on your 2022 income taxes. So please go right now to HughHewitt.com and just click on the Prison Fellowship banner. Remember, there are only 3 days left in this year. Now we got to talk about myPhDweightloss.com. We got to get the update from Dwayne on his use of myPhDweightloss.com. How's it going, Dwayne?
Well, as you saw last night doing the after show, and as you've seen today, I'm 50 pounds down, and I've held it. I've got through the Christmas break, and I think I added half a pound over the Christmas break, and I've already kind of tapped on the brakes a little bit to get back down to my ideal weight. I'm within 2 pounds of what I got down to, and I'm able to kind of hold it. I mean, the maintenance part of this whole diet is you want to stay within 10% of what your ideal weight is, and I've stayed within 2% of my ideal weight, so I'm pretty happy with the way things are. And it's New Year's, right? Everybody makes all these resolutions. One of the most popular resolutions is losing some weight that you put on, and people always fail to see it through. Well, yeah. You can see it through. This is something, it's an easy enough thing to do. The food's good. The program is good. The nutritionists that you talk to that keep you accountable make it possible for you to succeed with this. They put everything in your path to make this a successful project. All you've got to do is make the commitment and decide that you want to lose the weight. You could lose 50 pounds I did it in 12 weeks. It's very doable.
But this isn't a diet. This is really a lifestyle change, right? I mean, that's the idea behind this.
It's a lifestyle change. It starts out as a diet, and then as the diet progresses, it becomes a lifestyle change. You start to look at food differently, and once you get to maintenance mode, then you start looking at, okay, what are some trigger foods that instantly start putting on weight again, and you start to avoid it. Or you plan for it, and you kind of behave yourself the rest of the day, and then you spend your fun carbs on the stuff that you've got to eat in moderation.
Right. I mean, myPhDweightloss.com. That's the key to this, and it's a key to maintaining weight anyway. You can't just diet. You have to change your diet. You have to change your approach to diet.
You've got to decide it's time to do it and stick to it, and then you've got people that are on your side that are in your camp that help you do it. 864-644-1900 is the phone number. 864-644-1900 or myPhDweightloss.com.
It's great to see you looking healthy. Believe
we've been
it or
friends
not, for a long time, so I mean, it's great to see you looking healthy.
And believe it or not, I just had a doctor's appointment for something completely different, just kind of related, just as a follow-up, as a checkup on the cancer thing, which is fine.
Right.
But they took my blood pressure, and my blood pressure was down 25 points from when I was up 50 pounds. So there's lots of good things that come out of this.
Well, myPhDweightloss.com. That's where you go to find out more. Dwayne, great to see you doing so well on this. When we come back, we're going to talk with my friend Cam Edwards about Second Amendment issues from BearingArms.com. I'm Ed Morrissey, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by PhD Weight Loss and Nutrition. Go to myphdweightloss.com to learn more.
Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show, home of the most awesome bumper music ever. Flashing back to my teen years here with Disco Inferno. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today, and welcoming my friend Cam Edwards, my colleague at Town Hall Media, also the editor of Bearing Arms at Cam Edwards on Twitter. Cam, we're going to be talking again in just a few hours. I guess this is almost like a show prep sort of chat here.
That's right. Although I hate to get into the Salem business here, but I don't think we actually have a VIP Gold live chat this week. I think our producer Jim is
we
on.
don't. That's right.
So this is the only time we're going to get a chance to talk today. So I'm even more excited to be here.
Well, I've got a post to delete then because I had forgotten that we were doing it today. Excuse me while I go do some really quick editing.
If only you had a managing editor over there.
I guess Dwayne will have something else to beat me over the head with here as the show goes on. So yes, we're not doing it today. My apologies to everybody. So yes, this is the only place where you get a chance to listen to Cam and I talk. And so Cam, it's the end of the year. Obviously things slow down in a lot of aspects of the news, but not necessarily on Second Amendment issues. You guys are really busy over at BearingArms.com with some of the same nonsense that is going on throughout the year, including people like Chris Murphy who don't understand the gun laws that already are in existence, and Supreme Court. Tell us a little bit about Chris Murphy, what that was about. I know Tom Knighton wrote about it, but I know that you're well versed on these things.
Yeah, so Chris Murphy is following the lead of Governor Kathy Hochul in New York. And you will recall back in late June, the Supreme Court issued an opinion in a case called New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. And in that decision, they struck down New York State's may issue concealed carry laws. Basically, the state of New York, New Jersey, a handful of other states had wide discretion in approving or denying anybody's right to carry. New Jersey did not react quite as swiftly as New York did, but the law that they have put together is just as bad, if not worse. It regulates and really restricts the right to carry in everything from your private vehicle to all private property to the vast majority of publicly accessible places in the state of New York, while increasing the fees it costs to apply for a carry license. There's now an insurance mandate for all concealed carry holders. It's unclear whether or not any insurance companies actually offer a policy that would fit the requirements for the state of New Jersey. But this is an attempt by the state of New Jersey to continue to deny people this right. And before, it was denying deciding who could carry, and denying people the rights based on that tactic. Now it's, okay, fine. Most people can get a carry license. Well, now they can't carry anywhere. And that's the strategy that they're taking. So we've got multiple lawsuits filed in the state of New Jersey. There is going to be a preliminary hearing for an injunction, I believe, in mid-January. But you also mentioned the Supreme Court. Next week, the briefs are due for the Supreme Court possibly intervening in New York's concealed carry laws. So, yeah, this is kind of a quiet week, but we're going to kick off 2023 with a bang in the courts here when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things about the Bruin case that is making people crazy, right? I mean, the Bruin case, we were talking about the Supreme Court earlier today, apparently embracing outcome-based decisions, which I think is a huge mistake is strategically for the Supreme Court in Title 42. While I don't mind the outcome itself, I think the Supreme Court taking a position that they're looking at outcomes rather than the law is a real problem when you're talking about things like the Bruin case, like the Dobbs case. I think it undermines their authority on this. But at least Bruin and Dobbs have been decided. They're precedential now, and they're in place. But Tom, I think it was Tom, also wrote about an op-ed that is trying to make the Supreme Court feel guilty about damaging survivors by ruling for the law in Bruin. And again, this is one of the reasons why I think it's dangerous for the Supreme Court to weigh outcomes as much as they did in the Title 42 case, even though it's a temporary stay. It really kind of undermines their argument in Dobbs and Bruin that, hey, this is the way that the law is. It's up to you guys to figure out how to deal with it. And you end up with stuff like this. Well, you didn't give us the outcome we wanted, and so people feel damaged by this. And it's one of the silliest aspects of this. But
Yeah, it is a silly argument, but listen. I mean, I think the emotional appeal has always been a fundamental part of how the gun control lobby messages, right? And with the Bruen decision, going along with Heller and McDonald, they're losing the legal arguments. It's very, very difficult for them to say, well, there is no right to keep and bear arms anymore. And so now it's, well, when you respect or acknowledge that right, you're hurting people, you're harming people, and people will be so much better off if you just pretended that right didn't exist. That, of course, denies, the existence of people who protect themselves with firearms. That's the first thing that I would point out, right? Nobody's denying that criminals misuse firearms on a daily basis in this country.
Right.
But, listen, we have drunk drivers every day in this country. We don't use that as an excuse to tell people, hey, you can't go visit grandma on Christmas. And we're talking about an enumerated right. We have people abuse the First Amendment every day, but we don't use that as an argument to let's ban social media so we can make child pornography go away. That's basically the argument that gun control groups are making here. It doesn't matter if it's a right. Let's go ahead and ban it because society will be better off if nobody can own a gun. As you well know, Ed, the problem with that line of thinking is that the people who, I carry a gun to protect myself from aren't going to pay attention to a law that says give up your firearms, right? So, this debate has been going on for decades, but I think the gun control lobby is feeling a little cornered right now, legally speaking. And you're right that these sort of outcome-based decisions by the court does, I think, have the danger of undermining the legitimacy of their opinions. But let's be honest, the left doesn't hold Bruen to be legitimate any more than they hold Dobbs to be legitimate, regardless of what they say with Title 42.
Right. I do think that we could go down an interesting road here in talking about First Amendment restrictions and what the federal government did with Twitter and probably with Facebook, Google, and other things in censoring dissenting opinions and suppressing people who dissented from the government talk. But I mean, that's probably a different topic. I want to stay focused on Second Amendment stuff because, as it turns out, much to my dismay, I only have you for 10 minutes today rather than doing the most fun hour in our VIP Gold chat sessions at Hot Air. I want to talk about a case that I actually hadn't heard about until I read it this morning at bearingarms.com. Amicus briefs hope to save serial number requirement. I confess to not being up to speed on this case out of West Virginia, in which a court ruled that a requirement of having serial numbers on firearms is unconstitutional. I'm not necessarily sure that even the gun industry would necessarily go that far. What was that about, and what outcome are you looking at here?
Yeah, well, first of all, don't feel bad for not knowing about this case. I describe this as a supercharged moment for the Second Amendment litigation right now. I mean, they're just cases being filed every day, and one of them is the challenge out of West Virginia. It's in federal court, so it's challenging a federal law. Again, requiring, I think this is the new rule that Biden imposed, requiring serial numbers on DIY gun-making kits and requiring people to register or serialize their firearms in some circumstances. Sure. And, again, it goes back to the test laid out by the Supreme Court of Bruen, the text, history, and tradition test. And basically, if you can't find any sort of, longstanding tradition that firearms were required to be serialized, or there's no sort of historic analog that you can point to, then these laws are in doubt, and I think that's kind of the case when it comes to serialization of firearms at the moment. All this is going to play out in the courts. We'll see what happens, but I'm glad to see any judge give deference to our individual rights. So I think this is a good decision.
Okay, so you're actually feeling that this is going to be that this is a pretty good one to support and then to follow. What do you think the prospects are that the Supreme Court will follow through on this decision? I mean, because clearly it's going to everybody on both sides is going to make sure that this thing gets to the Supreme Court, regardless of what happens at the appellate level. Where do you see this going?
Well, this is one of those cases I don't know that the court is actually going to take up, and they may just let the appellate court be the last word for now. Because one of the things that we've seen over the past 10 years or so is that the court is reluctant to step in and decide every Second Amendment case, and there are a lot of them out there right now.
Right.
The court has already granted cert to a case dealing with Maryland's ban on so-called assault weapons, New Jersey's ban on magazines, Hawaii's ban on open carry. So they've already granted cert and vacated and remanded four cases after Bruen. So their docket is already getting, I don't want to say a little full, but they've already got a lot on their plate dealing with Second Amendment issues. So I think unless you're dealing with egregious violations like what we're seeing in New York and New Jersey right now,
I think the Supreme Court is likely to take sort of a hands-off approach for the next couple of years and let the appellate courts battle it out using the Bruin test, and see where some of these sort of, ancillary or smaller issues shake out. But I do expect that they're going to, they're not going to let go of the magazine ban, these ban on so-called assault bans, and concealed carry, because these are fundamental issues when it comes to the ability of tens of millions of Americans to exercise the right to keep and bear arms in self-defense.
Well, I think you're right about that, Cam. And I've expressed my disappointment that they granted cert and remanded Young versus Hawaii, which was my favorite of the the idea that Hawaii's pre-constitutional traditions outweigh the Constitution I was just looking forward to what the opinions were going to be on that particular argument, and I'm bitterly disappointed. We've got maybe like 30 seconds. Which case should we be looking at this term in the Supreme Court? Is there one?
I think there's more than one. But yeah, Colby versus Frosch, I think, is one. That's the Sullivan's Band case out of Maryland. But really, the first thing to look for is Antoniuk versus Negrelli, which is the case the Supreme Court's being asked to intervene in, and that's the New York challenge. So, we could see movement on that next month.
All right. Well, Cam Edwards from BearingArms.com, at Cam Edwards on Twitter, and every Wednesday except today, we do our VIP Gold chat at Hot Air and Bearing Arms. So be sure to join us in VIP Gold and join us in our chats. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt. We'll be right back.
Don't go anywhere. Ed Morrissey be back for the last part of the show. I do want to remind you about AndrewandTodd.com. Some of you are shopping for a home. And if you're doing that and you don't have a realtor, Andrew and Todd will get you a realtor. But AndrewandTodd.com or with Sierra Pacific Mortgage are mostly important because they're bankers. They're with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They lend you the money, soup to nuts, loan application. If you start this week before January, you'll be able to have a letter of ability. You'll be cleared for financing up to a certain limit depending on your income, where you want to move to, what your credit rating is, what you're selling. They'll do all that information. They'll give you a letter from Sierra Pacific saying this person is qualified to buy a house for this amount, and we will back it up. We'll close it within 30 days. They'll do the whole 9 yards, but you got to get started. The first move is up to you. Go over to AndrewandTodd.com, especially if you're a senior, especially if you're looking to do a reverse mortgage and get money out of your house, maybe a small amount, maybe a big amount, maybe a jumbo. They might be back after the start of the new year. Talk to Andrew Del Rey, talk to Todd Avey. I've known them forever. It's a great thing to do. It's a great thing to do during this week when not much is going on in the country as people celebrate the end of this year and the beginning of next, except go to AndrewandTodd.com. Don't forget as well, ReliefFactor.com. I pre-recorded a message for you in hours 1 and 2, and I'm doing it again in hour 3, because some things may be, you can count on Nick Chubb, death, taxes, and ReliefFactor.com being reminded here on the Hugh Hewitt show. If you head to ReliefFactor.com, you can get your starter pack by the time the new year arrives around. And that exercise that you're planning to do, the walking at first, 100 yards, then 1,000, then 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, eventually get up to a mile, then you'll start adding a quarter mile a day. Your plan, whatever it is, will be assisted by ReliefFactor.com. And moreover, Relief Factor, if you get the bag for that purpose, serves as a spur. Doesn't matter if you miss a day, but you get out there and you go for it. ReliefFactor.com. Come right back. Ed Morrissey sitting in for me today as I wing my way west. He'll take it from here. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show is now available on TV. Go to SalemNewsChannel.com or download the app. You can also watch on Roku and Fire Stick. Salem News Channel, the antidote to the mainstream media.
Welcome back. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt from the ReliefFactor.com studios here in Central Texas. The question is Hollywood staying alive? And here to answer that question is Christian Toto of Hollywood in Toto, at Hollywood in Toto on Twitter, HollywoodinToto.com. Christian, lots of stuff not happening at the box office these days. We've seen that there's potential for people to come back to the theaters, right? Top Gun Maverick drew phenomenal numbers. Even Avatar: The Way of Water is drawing phenomenal numbers, even though maybe it's not as phenomenal as they had hoped or predicted, but it's still drawing a lot of people to the theaters. But everything else seems to be crashing out. What's going on?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Mid-year, I was getting more optimistic. People are coming back to the theater. And we saw some mid-range hits like The Lost City did quite well. Elvis was overperforming, I thought, at the box office. And now you look around, and my gosh, if it's not Avatar, it's just dying. And, you've got a Spielberg movie, you've got other big names involved, and people just aren't showing up. It's very interesting.
It's really, and you talk about this at HollywoodandToto.com, Margot Robbie seems to be crashing and burning, and I think she's a bankable star. I'm actually really stunned by this because, A, she's very good, B, she's, clearly she's very attractive, and I think that among female stars in Hollywood, I would guess that she would have been one of the most bankable. But as you write at Hollywood and Toto, Babylon is dying. She had an earlier film that's dying on the vine. And I think what you were suggesting is that she had some mid-range hits, but that doesn't mean that she's going to be, she can't open a film, basically, is I think, open a blockbuster film, a major, a big budget film like Babylon is.
Yeah, two huge flops on her resume this year alone. She was in Birds of Prey a couple of years ago, and that was a superhero film that didn't make superhero money. So listen, like you said, very talented, very beautiful. There's nothing I'm not going to critique her in any way, but it's really not her fault. This is just movies today. Hollywood, the audiences come out for the IPs, intellectual properties, the franchises, the brands. They don't go for specific actors and actresses. It's just the way it goes. A Tom Hanks movie can bomb. A Will Smith movie can tank. It's just how we work today. And I think Hollywood understands that. That's why we see so many sequels and reboots and prequels and things like that.
Well, I don't want to necessarily hang Babylon on Margot Robbie because you've got Brad Pitt in Margot Robbie. And Brad Pitt isn't opening that movie either. And I don't remember how Bullet Train did, which by the way, I really enjoyed Bullet Train. My wife hated it. I really loved Bullet Train. But I don't think that did terribly well at the box office, and that's already on streaming. So I'm planning on watching it again because it's on streaming. But even Brad Pitt really isn't opening movies these days. And Tom Cruise opened, Top Gun Maverick, but I think that was more about the action and the sort of cinema verite approach that he took to it, which was very unusual these days.
Yeah, and I think Tom Cruise is the closest we may have to a bulletproof brand. I know off-screen
he's got his issues
there for sure. But as a movie star, he brings it. He delivers. He's consistent, and he's very apolitical. He's very hands-on when he makes these movies. You can just see and you hear all the stories about how dedicated he is to the craft, to getting it right, to giving people what they want to see on the big screen. So he's kind of a unicorn at this point. But listen, Brad Pitt's very talented. He won an Oscar a couple of years ago. Nothing wrong with him, but he can't guarantee, people will go to the theater. We've seen that. And Bullet Train, I think I liked it a little less than you. I thought it was fun. But it wasn't a blockbuster. It came out late summer. There was no competition. And it may have just crossed the 100 million barrier, which is sort of the low threshold.
Yeah, for a film like that, yeah.
It wasn't a smash.
Yeah, I didn't recall it being a smash either. The thing I think about Tom Cruise, and again, the off-screen life aside, he's one of the few people who actually is trying to engage the audience too. He had that lead in to Top Gun Maverick where he thanked the audience for showing up. He just did that ad, I think it was for Mission Impossible, right? He was filming Mission Impossible where he was thanking people for showing up to Top Gun Maverick while he's diving out of a helicopter. And I think that helps support his brand. But I think that people really feel disconnected from Hollywood, and I think that is really hurting their bottom line here now. It's not just the Oscars anymore. It's the whole brand. And I think Hollywood's got a huge problem in this cultural disconnect.
Yeah, the brand is a major issue, but I think it's funny. I've been kind of asking my Twitter followers the last couple of days, why aren't you going to the movies? But it's not just one thing. It is the brand. That is the problem. It is streaming. There are more streaming alternatives. It is the fact that the big screen TV in your house is bigger and better and cheaper than it ever was. So I think all these different cultural forces are aligning, and this is the time where stars should be saying, thank you, come to the theater, we miss you, we appreciate what you do, and that's what Tom Cruise does, and very few people, and I will say Dwayne Johnson will do that on occasion. He can be very, he has a good outreach with his fans, and he's very, he wants to connect with them. So I think he's an exception as well.
All right. Well, Christian, we don't have much time left at all, so I'm just going to tell people to go over to HollywoodInToto.com to read more of your commentary on what's going on in Hollywood. Go to @HollywoodInToto on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, Christian's a great follow there. Be sure to follow him there. And thank you very much, everybody, for being with us today. Tomorrow, Hugh returns at the Hugh Hewitt Show. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com saying thanks for listening.